Howdy. I figure I'll tell you a story that might not be true. Here a while back, Mr. Collins passed on. He was a pretty good old man. I really liked him. Well, he left behind his widow, and she's getting lonely. So she got to talking about about her life and, how things are with the gals over at WMU. And, she really doesn't want another husband. It would take her all them years to break in Mr. Collins, and she doesn't want another one to train. So one of the gals said, well, why don't you get you a parrot? And she studied on that. She thought, well, that's not a bad idea. She could teach it to do tricks, teach it parrot things, and, they're not terribly high maintenance. So she went over to the pet store there down the road from, down from the old bus station, you know what I'm talking about, and, over by the Civic Center. But she went over there and she got her a parrot, or was, shopping for a parrot. Well, that's the only pet store for about, 150 miles till you get up to Springfield. So she's pretty limited on her options. She went in there and there's a whole string of parrots down through there. And one of them says, parrot talks, $300. There's one next to it says, parrot talks, $250. And then there's another and it says, parrot talks. And then there's one of them asterisk things there next to the word talks, $50. So she looks at that parrot and it don't look unhealthy or nothing. So she walks up and talks to that purple-haired boy that runs the joint and said, what's the deal with the parrot with the asterisk by its name, by talks? What's the deal here? He said, well, Mrs. Collins, he said, I don't think you want that parrot. She said, well, why don't I want that parrot? Now, Mrs. Collins kind of ornery. She said, now, why don't I want that parrot? And he said, well, ma'am, he said, that parrot was owned by a Canadian merchant mariner. And that parrot is the foul-mouthedest thing that they ever was. He said, it is the cussedest outfit you'll ever hear. She said, well, you know what? She said, I was married to Mr. Collins ever since 3 days after he got back from Korea. And he was one of them pumpkin center Collinses. She said, and I broke him of every bad habit he ever had. I think I can handle a parrot. He said, yes, ma'am. He said, I ain't going to argue with you, ma'am. He said, but he said, I can't take this thing back. He said, this thing's been sitting here for months. He said, I can't take it back. Once you buy him, he's yours. No problem. So he puts the bag over the cage and sells her the cage and the feed and the piece of bone thing for the parrot to chew on, the whole 9 yards. She wrote him a check, gathered the parrot up, put her in his car, carried the parrot home. Parrot hadn't even so much as squawked up to this point. So she gets that parrot home and she pulls the cover off of it and she puts it over on one of them hook things on the corner there, took down her spider plant from in front of the window. Hung that parrot up there and she said, hello, Mr. Parrot, my name is Mr. Collins. How do you do? Would you like a cracker? And that parrot looked her right in the eye and he reared back and he cussed a blue streak like you can't imagine. And just plumb embarrassing, the things that he said. And Mrs. Collins, she didn't even blush. She looked at Mr. Parrot and she said, now, Mr. Parrot, this is a good Christian household here. I am not going to have you talking like that. Now, you've been warned. We're not going to do that in this house. Directly in walked a little bit of company, some of the gals that she knew from her Tuesday night study class, And they were sitting there having their coffee and some donuts or something or other, and directly that parrot squawked real big, and the company, she walked over to the parrot and she said, Mr. Parrot, would you like a piece of donut? And that parrot reared back and cussed a blue streak. Mrs. Collins walked over there right calm and she said, now, Mr. Parrot, this is number 2. You've been warned. We're not going to have that kind of language in this household. Well, Mrs. Collins apologized to her company, profusely for her parrot's behavior. A little bit later, the company went on home. Mrs. Collins turned on Andy Griffith there after the KY3 News got over, and she's trying to watch Andy Griffith, and directly that stupid parrot lit in a cussing again, and it just cussed up a blue streak, and Mrs. Collins said, "Now, Mr. Parrot, you've been warned." She opened up the cage with a smile on her face, you know, all so sweet, just like them church ladies are. And she reached in there and she grabbed up that parrot right quick, and she carried Paddy's little head and she carried him over to the deep freeze. And she said, "Now, Mr. Parrot, you've been warned 3 times. Now it is time to face your punishment." So she took that deep freeze, opened up the lid, stuck the parrot down in there, and shut the lid right quick. She looked up at the clock. Had about 15 minutes to go on old Andy Griffith. Wanted to see how him and Aunt Bee was getting on. Well, Andy Griffith got over with, and she walked over there at the freezer, and she knocked on the lid a little bit. Knock, knock, knock. She opened up that lid right slow and reached in there and grabbed the parrot up. And I mean, he was cold. He was almost a blue parrot. He was so cold. He shivered. She said, "Now, Mr. Parrot, are you done with that foul mouth cussing and carrying on?" And he said, "Bark, yes, ma'am." She said, "Mr. Parrot, have you got anything to say for yourself other than you're sorry?" He said, "No, ma'am." She said, "You sure you ain't got nothing to say?" He said, "Bark, bark. What them chickens do?" Y'all drive safe. Watch for deer.